Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thanks for
you.
joining us.
Thank you.
It's been a big adjustment this year. Beyond the election, you've moved into a new house.
That's true, yes, but it's a beautiful house.
It's a beautiful house. Our house, taxpayers?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so anyone is welcome.
You're going to have people taking you up on it.
I know. Be happy to.
You started out just 1 week of question period, but a forceful week for you and your front bench. What was the new part for you, switching from being a cabinet minister and answering the questions to asking the questions and trying to hold the government to account?
Well, it is a switch, but when I was a minister, I always felt strongly about actually answering the questions that people posed to me from the opposition side. And now that I'm the leader of the opposition asking the questions, I want to ask substantive questions. Obviously, we're going to be tough on the government, especially since we've already seen them break a number of promises within 30 days.
It's been shocking.
It's been shocking, actually. So we're going to ask tough, substantive questions, but I expect a response and I expect an answer. So far, not so much. I feel like Mr. Trudeau is still campaigning, but it's early days and he's getting used to his new role as well. But I hope that we can have a respectful exchange and we can get some good answers out of the government.
Okay, well, since you brought it up now, I'll ask about that. Respectful exchanges. You've already had one of your critics stand up and ask for an apology from John McCallum and from Justin Trudeau. They were laughing, taunting. Michelle Rempel, after she asked it was a substantive question on how many people are working on the refugee file. Is it displacing other files coming forward, including immigration? Did you expect that, considering that they campaigned on being respectful, on changing the tone, not being the mean people that you were?
Right. Well, I was a little surprised because I did the first speech, which was the response from the speech from the throne. Then the Prime Minister did his speech, and the first person that got up, other than the two of us, which were leaders of the party, was one of his people, Scott Bryson, and immediately the sunny ways were over. So I know they campaigned on doing things differently and having a sunnier disposition in the House of Commons, but that didn't last very long. In fact, I think it took 25 minutes. So by all means, the House of Commons is a combative place by its very nature. And we have
two sword lengths apart.
Right, 2 sword lengths apart. And that's healthy. Debate is healthy. And listen, we have very contrasting views. This is a very left-wing Liberal government. This is not the Paul Martin Liberals. This could be the NDP. I mean, I feel sorry for Tom Mulcair on the other end of the chamber because everything this government's doing is right out of his playbook. So we have a very left-wing Liberal government, and we have a Conservative Party that some conservatives might argue isn't right-wing enough, and yet we are occupying the full right-hand part of the spectrum.
No longer the Liberals that sit in the middle.
No, they are not in the middle.
Decades ago.
They are not in the middle. I mean, this is a very, big government, tax and spend policy government, intrusive large government, and the policies that they're going to be bringing forward, some are extreme. They're not sound policy. They're not evidence-based policy. Things like immediately asking for a moratorium for tanker traffic off the West Coast. Interesting. They haven't actually consulted with any of the First Nations, many of which who support
liquid natural gas,
LNG, and other pipeline to Tidewater, and yet they haven't consulted with First Nations who are interested in this kind of economic development. They haven't consulted with the province, and they, right out of the gate in the first week did this.
One of your critics stood up, and I'm trying to remember who stood up and asked about Billy Bishop Airport on the same. It was Kelly Block.
Right.
Stood up and said, "What evidence did you look at to make this decision within 5 minutes of being sworn in, canceling the ability for the Billy Bishop Airport to expand with a new type of aircraft?"
No evidence. I mean, it's completely political. And so, this idea that somehow they were going to be different, and the accusation that we made decisions that weren't based in evidence is just not true. So, we're already seeing sort of the old Liberal ways, and that's worrisome because we know that they were masters at dividing regions and choosing winners and losers and implementing policies that resulted in, winners and losers. And I think that's very concerning when you look at economic policy in particular. Look at Alberta right now. We've got 60,000 job losses. Some people estimate there could be as high as 110,000 job losses. And Prime Minister Trudeau is in Paris lauding an accord that could be very punitive to the oil and gas industry. But not even a mention of it, not even a mention that we will work with the provinces, particularly Alberta, that's already hard hit, both by the low cost of oil, but also already punitive carbon policies that the NDP has brought in to make sure that we don't hurt the industry further. There's no sense of that. I feel like his approach to Alberta is that we are just collateral damage in his climate change approach.
They didn't campaign on climate change being the big issue. I mean, they definitely raised it. But I was shocked to see that, in the election, it was all about middle class, middle class, middle class. Since then, the mandate letters released, the swearing-in ceremony, there's a mention of climate change in every mandate letter to every minister. Even the Minister of National Revenue that just collects the money got a mention of climate change in their mandate letter. They're talking about putting a price on carbon. You ran in 2008 against the tax on everything. How concerned are you of what that will do to a fragile Canadian economy?
I think everyone should be very concerned. We already have carbon pricing in almost every province in this country. So for the Liberals to then come into power and say, we're going to put another carbon tax on top of an already existing carbon tax at the provincial level is very concerning. And I have no hope that this is going to be revenue neutral because they need the cash. And so this will be just another way to raise revenue at the federal level. And that's concerning because there's provinces where we'll see more money being transferred out of places like Western Canada, which have some production that's carbon intensive, to parts of the country where not so much, like Quebec. And so again, we have these regional, pitting region against region with fiscal policy. And so I'm concerned about their approach. And they talked about supporting the middle class, but their middle class tax cut, we've already seen they didn't even do the math on it. So it's
it's not revenue
people.
neutral. Explain that. How is it going to cost people if you're just taxing the rich and giving the middle class a tax cut?
Well, I mean, they created, I think, is a $1.4 billion hole in their budget, and they in their estimates, and they didn't do the math ahead of time, apparently. So nobody realized that this is actually not good economic policy. So they're moving ahead with it anyway. So in the end, what benefit does our economy get out of it?
So it's going to lead to higher deficits, you believe?
I believe it will lead to higher deficits. I mean, creating a disincentive in one part of the economy to somehow give people a small tax reduction in another makes no sense to me.
When I looked at their own numbers,
taxes?
Their payroll tax hike on CPP
EI.
and EI, those will actually be larger than the tax cut.
Right. So it's not revenue neutral. This is a tax and spend government. They have over 200 campaign promises, many of which are very expensive, and they need our money. They need to go into the pockets of taxpayers and find more ways to raise revenue. So whether it's a carbon tax or it's EI, CPP that'll hit the bottom line of a lot of businesses, these are very punitive taxes.
One of the first promises that the new Liberal government broke was its 25,000 refugees by December 31st. Now, I applaud them for that because I think they were going too fast. When people originally said, hold on, is that a wise idea? Are you going too fast? We were called bigots.
Right.
The Premier of Ontario, key ally of Justin Trudeau, said, if you oppose this in any way, you're a racist. Ujo Desange stood up and said, really? Does the government have a clue on what they've gotten themselves into in terms of trying to bring that many people that fast? There's logistics issues, health issues, security issues.
There are security issues, and they have to do this right if they're going to do it. But what my big concern is that the people that are arriving right now are people that were processed under our government, and many of which are privately sponsored. Now, it takes longer, and you can receive less people because it's a longer process. But what the difference between private sponsorship is, which is what we pushed, and government-sponsored program or government-sponsored refugees, which is what the Liberals will bring in, and they say hundreds and hundreds of plane loads, is that there's a Canadian family that sponsors the refugee family. And so there's a shared cost. The taxpayer,
and a connection.
there's a connection, there's integration. I mean, that's what you want when people are arriving in the country, especially from a war-torn region. So they're welcomed in the community. Their sponsor family, literally adopts them, takes them to the local school, introduces them to the neighbors. They have someone to take care of them and help integrate them into the community. That's the ideal situation. And I worry about this approach the Liberals are taking just to meet this deadline. Not only a deadline, but this amount that they've committed to, 50,000 people. They're going to put them in army barracks, and they'll be wards of the state. And then from there, they'll move them to social housing. That's not ideal. It's not ideal for integration into our communities. And why don't they just slow down and find Canadian families, who there are many of, who would be happy to privately sponsor refugee families? It's a much better situation for the refugee family. In terms of integration and job opportunities and schooling for the kids. And I just think they want to meet this time frame and this commitment, and it's become so political for them that they're not seeing, ironically, what's good for the refugees that are coming in. It's unfortunate. And on the security side, we know that people are coming in from a war-torn country full of terrorism.
And war criminals.
And people that are good at creating fraudulent documents. They're good at getting around the system. They know how to game the system. And so, yes, we have good people in the government working on this, but it's not, it's not fail-proof. So there's an issue there, and I think people are rightly concerned. And so it's incumbent on the government to prove otherwise and to make sure that this rush to get people through isn't in any way affecting security.
The fact is, refugees are being created by the civil war,
right,
and by ISIS.
Right.
You've been pushing the government on trying to get an answer on what Canada's role is in fighting ISIS, and I don't think they've been very forthcoming because I'm not sure they know. Defense Secretary Carter in the Obama administration has just written to all allies asking them to do more as we're about to pull back. The government says we'll do training. In my understanding of training from what we did in Afghanistan, that means putting our soldiers on the front line.
Sure it does.
Have they been upfront with us about that, what this potentially could lead to, or are they, again, not thinking through what they promise?
I think they're making it up as they go along. I think that they will pull our CF-18s out, and in fact, they don't want to be involved militarily. And so I think training for them is not like the training we're doing right now, which is our special forces very close to the front line in very dangerous situations, supporting our allies and the local Iraqi forces. I think that they hope to just have things done in the classroom. I mean, that's their philosophy. That's what they think is enough, but it's not enough. I mean, President Obama himself said one of the key pillars to defeat ISIS is airstrikes. So I'm tired of hearing the Prime Minister get up and say the role that we're playing in the airstrikes is insignificant. And so why bother?
Well,
so
only 2% of the airstrikes were Canadian,
right.
while apparently Canada only has 2% of greenhouse gas emissions. So I guess we should do nothing there as well.
Right. I mean, philosophically, they're not interested. That's what I think, in being a part of this coalition against terror. And that's where we have a stark contrast between the Conservatives and the Liberals. Particularly this, I think there's a lot of Liberals that are actually uncomfortable with the Prime Minister's position on this. I mean, it's a very left wing position to take.
Let me ask you, as someone that has been a strong voice for women, women are some of the most vulnerable people in that region, subjected to slavery, sexual slavery, murder. If you want to stand up for women, doesn't that include standing up to try and stop the barbarians?
Yes, and I made that point to the Prime Minister that, human rights, if you don't act to stand up for human rights, they're just aspirational ideas on a piece of paper, and it's not good enough to just talk about them. At some point, you have to act, and sometimes it means going to war. We have fought wars over these things, and we're now at war with ISIS. The whole Western world and others are at war with ISIS. This is an organization that wants to annihilate the way we do things and, the values we hold, whether it's freedom, democracy, or the equality of men and women. I mean, these people hate people like me that can vote, women that can vote and hold office, not wear a niqab, and have freedom of movement, and an ability to have a career. I mean, these are values they do not hold, will never hold, and in fact, they would like to see people like me extinguished. So, it's not enough for the Prime Minister to say, yes, we're worried about the terrible terrorists, which is what he called them. If you really believe in human rights, you have to be willing to actually fight for them. And that's what's at stake here. And that's why every other country is stepping up their efforts against ISIS. And we're stepping back. It's absolutely shameful.
Where does the Conservative Party, the Conservative movement, go over the next year or so? You're at the helm now in an interim basis. You're going to have a leadership race. Is it a complete rebuild that your party has to do over the next 18 months?
No, I mean, we started the election at 32% of the vote. We ended the election at 32% of the vote. That's the same percentage of the popular vote we got when we won a majority in 2011. We lost literally, I think it was a few 100,000 votes this time. But we were beat. We got 32%, they got 39%. We have 99 MPs. This is by no means a defeat of the Conservative movement or the Conservative Party of Canada. We have a very strong foundation. We know that our policies are very well supported by Canadians, and I would argue by a lot of, right of center or center liberals. So it'll be interesting to see how we reach out to some of those people who do believe in balanced budgets and low taxes and do believe in the military role for Canada to play in the war against ISIS. These are core values and policies that are widely supported by Canadians. So we're in a very good place. We have a strong opposition team. And I think it's an exciting time for the Conservative movement because, we had a decade and an era under Mr. Harper who left us an incredible legacy in the Conservative movement. But now in any political party, it's exciting to have a leadership race. So we'll have a number of people come forward from within the party and potentially from outside the party with their vision. And there will be lots of debates. Who knows if people will have opposing views or different ideas about where things should go. But that's an exciting time. But by no means are we starting from scratch. I feel very strongly that we have a very, very strong foundation. We have a strong membership across the country that is behind us 110%. And, for them and for me, it's not easy to sit and watch all of the great things that the Conservative government did. Our tough on crime legislation. We just heard in the House of Commons that the Liberals are going to dismantle all of those mandatory minimum sentences and tough on crime legislation. It took 10 years to create a justice system that puts the victim at the center instead of the perpetrator. And now we are going to have to sit and watch. So we're going to hold them to account. There's a very strong contrast between this Liberal government and our Conservative opposition. And we're going to stand very strongly in opposition to the things that they do. And Conservatives, I think, will be very proud of the positions that we take.
All right. Ms. Ambrose, thank you very much. Merry Christmas. And
thank you. Merry Christmas
all the
to
best
you.
in 2016.
You too. Thank you.